Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, paragraph 22. What has just been said can also be expressed by saying that reason is purposive activity. The exaltation of a supposed nature over a misconceived thinking, and especially the rejection of external teleology, has brought the form of purpose in general into discredit. Still, in the sense in which Aristotle too defines nature as purposive activity, purpose is what is immediate and at rest, the unmoved, which is also self-moving, and as such is subject. Its power to move, taken abstractly, is being for self, or pure negativity. The result is the same as the beginning, only because the beginning is the purpose. In other words, the actual is the same as its notion, only because the immediate, as purpose, contains the self, or pure actuality, within itself. The realized purpose, or the existent actuality, is movement and unfolded becoming. But it is just this unrest that is the self. And the self is like that immediacy and simplicity of the beginning because it is the result, that which has returned into itself, the latter being similarly just the self. And the self is the sameness and simplicity that relates itself to itself. All right, so Hegel is clearly continuing, and he seems to be sort of announcing that this paragraph is sort of a paraphrase of what he was trying to get at in the previous paragraph. And that wonderful little formula, this unrest that is the self, his tendency to depict the self not as an object, remember, nor as an immaterial soul, but as a process of continually departing and returning to oneself, an activity that can't really be characterized in terms of any of its discrete moments. But there are several other things I want to focus on in this paragraph. One, we get something that he very, very rarely does in his major writings here. He actually gives us a proper name, Aristotle. I think that's the first proper name that we've come across in this book, and there aren't going to be too many more, because he very, very rarely mentions specific thinkers or philosophers or writers. And this is one of the few times when he does so. And it's clear that he's got several different points of Aristotle's thought in mind. And in fact, I think he's going to basically continue to have Aristotle in mind when he gets to talking about the relationship between a subject and its predicates in the next paragraph. But what he's focused on here primarily is Aristotle's conception of purpose, and particularly his notion of the final cause. Remember, in Aristotle's system, there are basically four types of cause and effect relationships. We can have the efficient cause, which is kind of the classic one, right? But there's also the material cause, the formal cause, and the final cause. The final cause is basically the telos, the goal that an entity already has sort of built into itself. The thing that already dictates the direction of the individual's life cycle. In the previous paragraph, he had talked about the relationship between the embryo and the full human being. He had said, though the embryo is indeed in itself a human being, it is not so for itself. This it only is as cultivated reason, which has made itself into what it is in itself. And I had tried to give that a kind of Sartrean reading by emphasizing the self-directedness of that process. The embryo becomes itself by taking its own development in hand. And that sounds very much like, a Sartrean existence precedes essence, the notion that, what a human being is always kind of indeterminate until the moment of their death. Up until that point, they are at a certain liberty to be whatever they will make of themselves. But here, I think Hegel in paragraph 22 is getting into a much more deterministic vision of that self-development. He does say that it involves a kind of self-moving. And he's seen in referring to the kinds of the ideas here that he says are sort of going out of date, the exaltation of a supposed nature over a misconceived thinking, in other words, sort of materialism's revenge over idealistic mysticism, and also this the rejection of external teleology. He thinks these are kind of characteristic intellectual prejudices of the age. We no longer believe in final causes the way that Aristotle seems to have. But it's important, of course, that he uses the term external teleology. The idea is that an individual's development is ultimately a self-directed process. It's not a goal that they had implanted within them from outside. The teleology is not like the software that you run on. It's something of which your own telos is a function of your labor. Again, not simply an inert object that sits inside of you, waiting to come out, but something that has to be worked on and worked through. But that still sounds like a real far cry from the Sartrean notion of freedom, the Sartrean notion of subjectivity, where its foundation in pure negativity is what sort of releases it from that deterministic process, opens it up so that it's not simply, one thing being acted upon by other things, an atom in the void, but has this kind of self-directed, self-critical, self-moving aspect to it. The phrase he uses in the middle of that paragraph, the unmoved, which is also self-moving, I think he clearly has in mind the passage from Aristotle's Physics, where he talks about the unmoved mover. I think it's in the very last book of the Physics where he brings this up. It's a cosmological principle. His idea is that we can't really imagine a universe operating according to the laws that we observe, without also positing at its foundation some being that pushes it into motion without itself being acted upon, a being which is absolutely active, in which there is no passivity. Thomas Aquinas will make this a central feature of his theology. The Aristotle's unmoved mover becomes in Thomas Aquinas really one of the names for God. And he'll build this doctrine, this Aristotelian conception, into his famous five-part sequence of proofs, the 5 ways of demonstrating the existence of God. It's obvious that Hegel also kind of has God in mind here, and yet he also has something a little bit beyond that. I think he's going to want to reserve some of this unmoved mover aspect for the subject as such, which is not simply identical with God, but rather with the notion, the agency of the whole of reality, that which sets all of the universe into motion here. So we'll want to keep that in mind, because I think Aristotle is definitely going to still be on his mind over the course of the next several paragraphs here. But we'll also want to try and keep our ears open for another kind of teleology. External teleology is the one that he seems to feel is on the outs, but he nevertheless feels that there is a version of teleological thinking that he wants to incorporate, I think, into his own dialectic.